This is R A Manard, for Monks of the Way, and this is the weekly Truth Talk. Now, I'm going to start off by saying, if you thought I was just going to tell you what the meaning of life was, that's not going to happen. However, I will give you some valuable information about it, and you can find it for yourself. I think that's way better. Apparently, Buddha thought that was way better too. Let me tell you why I think this. Because there were different sutta in which he said different things, but he did not come out and go, here's the meaning of life. Certainly, I don't believe it's because he didn't understand, but because the answer is difficult. And if you were to gain enlightenment, full enlightenment, you'd know anyway. But what did he say? And there's another sutta in which he mentions the fruit of the contemplative life, the life of the monk. So why don't we start there and see how much time we've got? The sutta I'm talking about is the fruit of the contemplative life. It would be spelled Samannaphala, and then of course the word sutta, Sutta. He mentions there's solitude's delight, for instance, for slaves and farmers, freedom from servitude, resulting in being content with the simplest food and shelter, delighting in solitude as well as the veneration of others. Another one, virtue's pleasure. The monk, consummate in virtue, sees no danger anywhere from his restraint through virtue. Endowment with this noble aggregate of virtue, he is inwardly sensitive to the pleasure of being blameless. Purity, basically, I guess I'd say. Simplicity's contentment. Wherever he goes, he takes only the barest necessities along. This is how a monk is content. Another one, mental calm. With mindfulness and alertness, a monk cleanses his mind of covetousness, ill will, anger, sloth, drowsiness, restlessness, anxiety, doubt. Another one, bliss. He attains the states which are associated with permeating of his body with rapture, pleasure, equanimity, and pure, bright awareness. I think that could probably be translated better. Anyway, knowledge, basically insight. With his mind thus concentrated, purified, and bright, unblemished, free from defects, pliant, malleable, steady, and attained to imperturbability. Can't pronounce it right now to save my life. Oh, the monk directs and inclines it to knowledge and vision. He discerns. This body of mine is endowed with form, composed of the four primary elements, born from mother and father, nourished with rice and porridge, subject to inconsistency, rubbing, pressing, dissolution, and dispersion. And this consciousness of mine is supported here and bound up here. Another one, supernatural powers. Take this with a grain of salt. Having been one, he becomes many. Having been many, he becomes one. He appears, he vanishes. He goes unimpeded through walls, ramparts, and mountains as though it were empty space. He dives in and out of earth as if it were water. He walks on water without sinking, as if it were dry sand, or dry land rather. Sitting cross-legged, he flies through the air like a winged bird. With his hand, he touches and strokes even the sun and the moon, so mighty and powerful. He hears by means of the divine ear element, purified and surpassing the human. Both kinds of sounds he hears, divine, human and divine, whether near or far. Another one, mind reading, which pretty much is supernatural powers, right? He can discern in others' states of consciousness, such as those with or without passion, lust, diversion, concentration, etc. Another one, three knowledges. He can recollect past lives, see the rebirth of other beings, and knows the ending of suffering and the fermentations of sensuality, becoming, and ignorance. Release from regular suffering. His heart, thus knowing, thus seeing, is released from the fermentation of sensuality, fermentation of becoming, the fermentation of ignorance. With release, there is the knowledge released. He discerns that birth is ended, the holy life fulfilled, the task done. There is nothing further for this world. So, these are things he mentions. What else does he mention? Well, he mentions quite a few things. He mentions also the greatest treasures in life. And they do not match the list I just gave you. I think you should look those up for yourself. Think about that. I want to be logical and fact-based here for a moment. Obviously, we have great freedom to think, to act as we like, even horribly, cruelly, evilly, if we like, if that's what we think we want to do. Why then would a person think, oh, the gods have just made a meaning of life, and that's it. They've made it for us already. And there it is, the meaning of life. It seems pretty ignorant on the face of it, definitely. And person after person has gone down that road thinking there is a meaning of life, that it is not an individual thing. Once again, not making sense. Somewhat famously, Alan Watts, who studied with monks for 10 years, he, for most of those years, had a relationship with a woman that was there that he met and left with her to go marry her. Didn't really give it an honest go, but he did pick up a few things from the monks, most of which he misunderstood. But, here and there, he really had something. He, though, decided that he knew the meaning of life. Now, how did he discern such a thing? Was there a flaw in his discernment? You tell me. He wrote down on a scrap of paper all the things he could think of. And then he set about trying to disprove them, and there was one he couldn't himself disprove. So he decided that was the meaning of life. What was the thing he couldn't disprove? It is what it is. Defining it by itself. how you understand it there, whatever that thing is. Okay. So first of all, he assumed that the meaning of life, he could come up with it. Secondly, he assumed if he himself couldn't disprove something that, once again, he himself had come up with, then, well, it must be true. Thirdly, he defined it by itself. It is what it is. It's hard to prove that something isn't what it is. Come on now. Come on now. That's about the level of discernment you're going to find with people who say they know the meaning of life. So I do not suggest you believe them. I do not suggest you go down that rabbit hole thinking you are using proper discernment. He certainly was not a skeptic, that Alan Watts, when it came to what he decided was true. He was a wholehearted believer and was not going to hear different. That doesn't sound like Buddha, does it? No, it does not. So, when we study the way, we want to understand Buddha. We get to know him whether we want to or not. And he was a person who was always ready to debate what was true with anybody at just about any time. And I think we should be that way too. As far as the meaning of life, I don't see why you couldn't find one for yourself. If it's not personal to you, then it's really not that meaningful, is it? I suggest you look over the fruits of the contemplative life and look over the greatest treasures, as Buddha mentions them. I advise you certainly look over the Four Truths and the Path of Eight and be a skeptic. And I don't think there is any other way to point you, and I don't think there's any point in it. And I know I've summed this up really simple, and I haven't made a big deal out of this, a big long drawn out affair. I haven't asked you to do a lot of thinking on your own here, but I've opened the way for you to do it. So I suggest you get to it. I want a certain thing for all of you. I want for the truth to remove delusion in your life the way light removes darkness. And I want to thank you for having a listen.